Hello there, everybody. Well, in today's episode of Carpo's Rambles, I'm going to cover all of my vlogging cameras and photography cameras, video cameras through the years. I'm going to cover about 16 different models, and this is aimed at the camera nerd out there. You know, I'm sure a lot of you have had a variety of cameras as well. Most of us end up with the old cell phone, which is a phenomenal tool. And I'm going to get to that. But first, I'm going to start from this side, and I'm going to work my way over. I'm going to talk about my experience with cameras, and I'm going to try to make it quick. I don't want to ramble. Now, this isn't not a buyer's guide. You will probably not run into half of these cameras unless you're looking for them. But just some thoughts on how much we've moved forward. This right here is the Sony CyberShot. I loved this camera. Now it looks nicer than it is. Truth is, pop the lens off and you see it just has a little hollow tunnel thing on it. It's actually just a lens hood. It's a decent camera. The lens comes out with the motor. It would have issues once in a while, but I vlogged on this thing for a couple of years when I first started my YouTube channel. And it was a great little tool. Honestly, it still works. I just got to find the battery charger, but I don't, see any need to use something like this. After I'd been using this for a couple of years, my father-in-law passed away, and I borrowed this camera from his stuff. Now, this thing changed my life, changed my vlogging experience, everything. This is a Panasonic HDC SD10. I think it came out probably between 10-15 years ago. It's an older camera, but it was one of the early HD cameras. It's what taught me that it's not about the megapixels or the size or the quality that you would think or weight, but this thing did the most amazing videos. And to this day, I've bought replacement batteries for it, and I've got extra charging components. Something happened to where the SD card slot got messed up, and it just won't read that there's an SD card in there. So I haven't been able to use it for a while. So after getting frustrated with that, I moved on. A couple of years later, well, not too long later, I bought these. This was my first mirrorless camera. I don't have a cover on here because it's broken. This is basically just a parts camera. It's all busted up. I used this thing vlogging for a couple of years and taking pictures everywhere. It's a Panasonic Lumix G3. It's still well over 10-15 years old probably. I actually liked it so much that when the body broke, it came with the lens that I'm using right here on this camera. The camera I'm using to record this is a Panasonic Lumix GH2, which I'll get to in a bit, but I bought a second body, a replacement one. The only thing I don't like about these is that the swivel screens tend to stop working, but they get very loose and kind of funky. But this one still actually works through the lens, and I can use the viewfinder. And that was the thing about mirrorless cameras that kind of sold me. They have a viewfinder, and you don't get that with, it's not the same with DSLRs. And if you're not familiar, I'm not going to get into the technical aspects, but I found that mirrorless cameras were phenomenal because if I bought fittings, I could buy a little tiny bracket like this, which would allow me to, basically this little ring fits on a vintage lens and allows me to put it on any Lumix body. See? You can put it on any mirrorless body. This will be the same for most mirrorless cameras. So I bought a lot of vintage lenses. These worked really well for a long time, but I needed a camera screen that I could see myself in. So for the meantime, I use this, which is, this is a Sony Handycam. It's the HDR CX7. And honestly, I've been using this strictly for vlogging about my family during lockdown. This probably for its weight, if all you do is video, and if all you're interested in is just doing videos of your family or your friends or your experiences, these little Handycams are absolutely amazing. They have a 20 times optical zoom. I mean, they're self-contained, they're very small, batteries are relatively cheap. This, when it came out, was $1,000, I think. Maybe a little more. I think it was like $1,200. the like MSRP on it, but I found it at Goodwill for $50 in the case. And I was like, all right, I'll buy that. $50 is more than fair for a good video camera. I used it for a while, and finally I broke down, and I went on Goodwill. I went on Craigslist, and I started looking for a new GH5, which is the camera that I wanted, my dream camera. And I said, well, I can't find that. I can't get not under $600 or something. And I couldn't get a Sony A7, I think is the one that I like there. But this is a Lumix GH2. It's the exact same camera I'm using here to film it. So I bought a pair of these on Craigslist about 2 months ago from a guy who, his friend was a photographer. He'd switched and upgraded. And it's just a standard mirrorless, just like the G3 I have, except for it's a little bit more, it has a lot more settings on it. It allows me to adjust for many different things without having to go into the pad. But it's pretty much the same as the other one. I bought 2 of these with, let's see, I bought 2 of these with, not with lenses, but I bought them with a case and 9 batteries, I think it was nine batteries for $220. I was really, really stoked on that. So I keep this one consistently mounted. This one's for doing, black and white photography. The lens I'm using is a vintage lens with an adapter, and this is the aperture is cranked wide open, and I just use it for black and whites. It's a 45mm Minolta Rocore X lens. Probably my favorite lens that I've ever used. This little setup right here is my very favorite portrait setup. A little 45mm on the mirrorless. So, I should move on before it gets too long. Briefly, I want to cover the 3 in the back here. This right here is the Sony Handycam, the high 8 or 8mm. This one is the Sony DV or Mini DV Handycam, and this also is a Sony Mini DV. They're all phenomenal, and their settings on these are just crazy. There are so many different options on these things, and it's sad that they're just totally irrelevant now. Like, what do you do with this? You could sell it for what, $100? People will still buy them for parts. The fact is, 90% of the people that buy these old cameras do it so they can watch their old home videos. But when my kid was young, my 10-year-old, back then digital cameras were still hard to come by, at least good ones, and cell phones sucked. So I used this, and I recorded probably 30 or so tapes of my family back then, which when we go back and watch, they look phenomenal. The next thing I have over here is in the very back here. This is an instant Polaroid, which I haven't used. I just got it at Goodwill. This right here is just your typical, your little digital camera. I just threw this in here as to make a point, just to look at how small the screen is and how far they've come. It's a cool Pix 2200. This one right here was actually top of the line during its time, and I still haven't got it working because I had a stuck shutter. But it was a PowerShot G3 by Canon, which is funny because the other one over here was a G3, but it's a totally different model. This I picked up at Goodwill. It's a gateway camera. This was the typical PC connected camera where it's got your PC link on it. And I bought it because it came with this box over here. And I thought, well, maybe I could get it working. And I never did. Briefly, I'll touch on Insignia, which is a total shit brand, but I tried to use one of these stupid little camcorders like this. It was a total piece of junk, which I think I inherited that somehow. This one blows my mind. This is a digital Mavica by Sony, and during the time when it came out, this was actually, if you see on the side there, it's got all kinds of different settings and switches. It has a really nice lens on it. I think it's a Zeiss lens. Anyway, this is the funny thing about it. It takes a floppy disk. I'm not kidding. A floppy disk. And you can take about 5 pictures on it, or like 10 seconds of video. And that's about it. And then you have to pull the floppy out and pop a new one in there. I bought it at Goodwill just as a novelty because it was kind of a standalone item. Right in the middle of, you know, the evolution of cameras. Moving on, I also have a really, really cheap version of a GoPro. I dream of having a GoPro of my own. I cannot believe of all these cameras I've never had a GoPro. This came with a drone we were given as a gift, and it's a really cheap, crappy camera. The point of putting this out here is it says HD 1080, means absolutely nothing. All that matters is the quality of the video itself. This Minolta I bought for 40 bucks. This is my film camera. This is a Minolta 7000 Maxim. This came with this lens, as well as a telephoto lens, and a bag and a bunch of accessories. And it was the very first autofocus camera that Minolta made, I think in the 80s. I got it for 40 bucks with all the lenses, and I only bought it so I could use these badass, it's a Sigma zoom lens. They're spherical lenses, and I use these for doing like close-up photography with an extension on them. But a film camera, the point being that it stands alone. Film cameras are still amazing things. If you take black and white photos with a real film camera through, say, a lens like this old Minolta Rocord lens, 45mm, you can get some of the most amazing, crisp photos that it will blow your mind. It blows away anything that I've been able to do with the digital. Even, I don't know. I don't know how to get into that, because I know that digital cameras have come a long way and they still take amazing photos, but maybe it's all in my head. But something about a film camera with a great photo, it's unique. And even these little ones, I picked this up at Goodwill for, I think, $5. It's a Pentax IQ Zoom 928M. Just a little disposable, the old, what they call granny cameras that people used to just pop in their purse and throw some film in there. These are actually coming back into style, and they're becoming quite expensive now, because people realize that being able to just pop a quick film camera out and take a picture sometimes can be much better than using all of these other digital cameras. And I should end up here on the old phone. Here we have an original iPhone. We've had it for years. It just sits around. Use it for music sometimes. I don't use iPhones. I use Android. But to make the point, this camera came out a decade or more ago, probably longer. And the pictures were okay, not great. I picked up this one, which is several years old. It's a HTC M8. And before it stopped working, this thing took the most amazing pictures I'd ever had. And now I have, I think, what is it, a Samsung Galaxy S7, I think, an S7, yeah. It's an older one. Got it for like $100 used, but the pictures of cell phones are very comparable to anything you will get in any of these categories. And I think today we can all admit and come to terms with the fact that the measly little cell phone might honestly be the photographer's best friend. And I'm saying that as a guy who absolutely loves my cameras, I love my lenses. What it comes down to is, how big are you going to blow up the picture? Who's going to look at it? Is it going to be a thumbnail, a meme? Is it going to be something that you don't care how fine the grain is? But honestly, even if the grain is super fine, cell phones seem to be much superior. But I will never leave my Lumix behind. This is probably my favorite camera so far. I would upgrade if I could afford it, but I can't afford it. Maybe somebody from a camera company will see this video down the line and be like, oh, I'll send him my model, and sure, I'll take it. But this is more of a look at what I've used. So have a wonderful day, my friends. Thanks for listening.